For me, particularly working in journalism, I'm always like, almost everything comes back to that. Like, we've got lizard brains that aren't really good at dealing with complicated problems, really creaky old institutions that move really slowly to regulate anything, and just this unbelievably powerful tech that we keep improving on an exponential growth curve.
Yeah.
Our brains aren't getting any better. Our institutions aren't getting any faster.
No.
But the tech keeps getting faster.
Yeah.
And then that feeds back into this kind of terrifying loop.
The New Zealand Tech Podcast, brought to you by Gorilla Technology, proactive and strategic IT.
Greetings and welcome along to the New Zealand Tech Podcast. I'm your host, Paul Spain, and welcome to our guest, Finn Hogan. Great to have you on the show for the first time.
Absolute pleasure to be here, Paul. How lovely is it to have a slow conversation with you, not me frantically chasing you around the country trying to get sound bites for the evening news. What a change of pace.
It's been an interesting last few weeks. Maybe you can fill listeners in on what you're talking about, where you fit into this big wide world of media in New Zealand, Finn.
Yes, I work for News Hub. I've got a few hats there. I mainly work for News Hub Nation, which is the politics and current affairs show, but I sort of cover tech more broadly for the newsroom in general. So do a bit for 6 p.m. news. I do a little bit for the AM show, and occasionally I'll pop up on project. So I like to say I've got an interesting Venn diagram of content of like RMA reform and dense political issues and video games and tech. So there's like 10 people in the country who like, I love tax policy and PlayStation, and I hope there's one journalist out there that makes content for me. And I do. And there's like 5 people who love it, and I'm here for that.
That's good. Well, they're all listening today.
Yeah, exactly.
Finn,
they're all here.
Cool to catch up, and some interesting stuff to delve into today. Before we start, though, I want to say a big thank you to our show partners, Vodafone, 2 Degrees, Spark, HP, and Gorilla Technology. Yeah, we're going to sort of cover a whole bunch of stuff, some sort of aerospace-y type stuff. Tesla doesn't seem to be able to keep out of the news, the gaming sector, artificial intelligence, some work that Microsoft are doing on the voice front. Boy, there's actually quite a bit here and a bunch more. I probably don't want to say all the topics in case we actually don't get through everything. But let's jump in. First of all, one of the companies that we've talked about in the past is a drone startup that actually sits within Alphabet, or Google, as some people would more commonly sort of refer to them as. Wing Aviation. There is now Wing Aviation NZ Limited. Mm-hmm. So we don't really know the full story of what that will look like just yet, but the fact that there's a New Zealand legal entity suggests something's going to happen. So what would you picture might happen? They've been doing their deliveries in Australia, testing out some stuff there with DoorDash, and I think they've done some supermarket type deliveries. And the name Wing sort of gives away a little bit about their drones in that probably, somewhat reminiscent of, and not entirely, but the Whisk Aero, who were, testing in New Zealand with their vertical takeoff and landing craft for air taxis, autonomous. But of course, these are taking food and bits and pieces around.
I think it's definitely going to start at that smaller direct-to-consumer level, right? It's going to be small parcel delivery. That's the way that you show the proof of concept. I know Amazon's been quite far ahead in the space for a while. So, yeah, I think it's really only a matter of time before we start seeing those really small sort of niche products being delivered straight to your door by a drone. And, of course, that's going to be a big moment just for the average Kiwi, I think. It's one of those threshold points that, oh, my God, a robot has just delivered my groceries. The future has just happened to me. And I think that's very good from a business and from an investment perspective of, even if the logistics in the back of house of the business aren't as impressive, what's customer facing is just so mind-blowing. And I think there's going to be a real sort of first mover advantage to whoever gets to be the company that normalizes that for Kiwis is going to be huge. Obviously, there are a lot of thorny issues to navigate there. You mentioned with Whisk, there's been, I think, some issues around the regulatory frameworks for how do we actually scale that up in New Zealand?
Yeah.
What does it mean from an aerospace perspective?
Yeah.
And I think other jurisdictions, particularly in Australia, are a little bit further ahead in that work. So I imagine before it gets very wide scale, there's probably a lot of work that needs to be done in Wellington. But like I say, I think we're very, very close to at least a few Kiwis just seeing that whizzing drone land in front of their door, which will be an amazing moment. Obviously, there's so many questions around noise pollution and everything else. But yeah, personally, I'm very excited. Like I say, it feels one of like those the future is now moments.
Yeah, we've seen, like Uber come into the market and it's changed things. I mean, this is one of those disruptive categories if they can get there, but it's been challenging, right? We've been talking about this stuff for a long time, and it hasn't normalized anywhere yet. Yes. So the gaps and the challenges, as you say, the regulatory sort of government legislative side of it is important, as are filling in those other gaps. But the fact that they're doing this and so on, with the trials like in Queensland, and that they've set up this New Zealand entity is encouraging from some perspectives. There are always other perspectives when new technology comes along in terms of what does it do to employment and
oh,
so on,
absolutely. Right? And I mean, I think I'm more excited about just the slightly more prosaic, but the delivery aspect. I think that's much more likely to come. The air taxi, vertical takeoff and landing. I mean, that's another one that's been around for decades at this point. Someone's been talking about that, and personally, it's one of those that it's incredibly glossy on an investor pitch, but when you really sit down and think about it, I'm not sure where the practicality is in that at all in terms of actually moving passengers. I mean, even Uber's quietly sort of just abandoned the Uber Lyft sort of side of the business, right? And I don't think, we're not Dubai. Like, we don't have the market for someone moving themselves in that way for the kind of cost that it would actually incur. And if the logistics of small drone delivery are a nightmare from a regulatory perspective, the regulatory framework on actually moving human beings via drone is just a next level. So I can't really see that coming. Could absolutely want to be proved wrong, but less excited about that one.
Yeah, look, both have a fair bit of interest, but it is kind of odd that the drone delivery side hasn't got a little bit further along, so really curious to see how it lands. But it's one of those things. If we're 10 years out, and we could easily have sort of crossed that threshold where it's just super common in certain scenarios. But you can imagine if it went nuts, like some things in terms of adoption, then you get all sorts of other issues, right? Drones crashing into drones and things sort of falling out of the air. Like, it's fine when you're doing one or two sort of sample scenarios. But yeah, if you've got craft that are crashing in the air, and let's not forget that helicopters, as we saw in Australia very recently, hit each other to this day. Where we were at our previous studio, looked out on where there had been an aeroplane and a helicopter crash in Auckland, some years ago. So having all these things just work perfectly, autonomously. There's definitely some work, although those certainly aren't insurmountable challenges.
Oh, and from us, I mean, and this is probably a whole other kettle of fish that we probably don't want to open, but the security concerns around widespread adoption of cheap drones and the airspace concerns, and we saw when Gatwick Airport got shut down by a drone, and the potential for mischief and worse than mischief to be done with drones as they become more advanced, more accessible. That's an issue that's been bubbling away under the surface for a long time, but I think if they get more widely adopted from a corporate perspective, that's only going to usher along the other issues that could come with wider consumer adoption as well.
Yes, that is quite a can of worms. Yeah. Tesla dropped their prices, New Zealand, Australia, China, sort of, a bit over a week ago. Now they've dropped prices in the US on like quite a big scale, 20% in some cases. So now you've got, when you discount that much or adjust pricing that much, and Uber have been quite dynamic, shall we say, when it comes to their vehicle pricing, like nobody else, and because they own the entire chain. So it's you compare it to, say, Toyota, who have gone through some processes to sort of standardise pricing and purchasing in markets like New Zealand and how that works. But other automakers where it very much comes down to what a dealer wants to do. You don't with Tesla, you don't have dealers sort of sitting on stock that you have to that you're going to please or displease because they own the whole lot. But when you do a huge price change like what they've done, you ruffle some feathers, and that seems to have happened in China last week, and then more recently in the US with people that have just bought vehicles and found, oh, my vehicle's now worth $10,000 or $20,000 less than what they paid for it. You can expect a few people shaking their fists a little bit, right?
Absolutely. I mean, it's almost like Tesla's trying to distract from some other things that potentially are going on higher up in the business. Look, it's never a great sign, and I think with Tesla particularly, they've got such a aura of the luxury electric vehicle. So there's an extra consideration when you knock off a chunk of the price that way, you devalue the luxury element of the brand in some respect. Of course, you shunt it down the price chain, you open it up to a wider group of consumers. So I think in the broadest sort of macro sense, it's a good thing that more people can get into Teslas, whether it's from an environmental perspective particularly. But I do think it is symptomatic that Tesla is facing, like so many other tech companies are currently, and automakers in general, are really facing not quite a crisis, but a really serious drop in the stock price. I mean, it was nearly $1 trillion tumble in NZ terms over the last 12 months. And obviously, I feel like stop the watch, Musk has come into the chat, like any kind of tech chat, Elon Musk sort of looms large in it. But of course, the chaos that surrounded him, it's hard to draw a direct causal link to the troubles that Tesla are having, but you'd have to be an idiot to not say it's not contributing to it, that the drama with Musk at Twitter is sort of making shareholders more nervous about the way Tesla is being run. And I think wound into this as well, which is very recent, is the viral footage of the 8 car pile-up from the autopilot. What do they call it? The full drive autopilot.
Full self-drive.
Full self-drive, which I think from a PR perspective is just a stupid thing to have named it, because you're just really putting yourself out there that if anything goes wrong, it's entirely on you. You're completely taken out of the hands of the driver.
Of course, all their materials say you've got to pay attention, you've got to, et cetera, but
that doesn't fit into a headline, right? All people hear is the full self-drive fails.
Or autopilot.
Fail, exactly. And no one was seriously hurt in that pile-up, but it's really damaging to the brand. And I know Elon Musk has said previously that the reason he's pushing so hard for this is that self-drive option is the difference between 10 years down the line, Tesla being worth $1 trillion or Tesla being worth some money, right? He really sees that as the thing that defines Tesla's future, because as they sort of lose their first mover advantage in the market, other electric car companies are catching up with them. Well, just like car companies in general are pivoting so hard into electric. You've got to give credit to Tesla for having done that. But slowly the rest of the world is catching up. Tesla is running out of lead, and they need something to kind of push them out ahead of everyone else. They think the full self-drive is it. But when you see headlines like this, I mean, it's not going to do them any good. I wouldn't love to be head of Tesla right now, even discounting everything else that's going on. But it's a worry, and the price discount, I think, kind of just feeds into the broader Tesla narrative.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sure we'll hear a little bit more about that particular scenario. I think it was back in, was it November or December that it happened? It's just come through the footage, and it's been fairly widely shared. One of the things that we don't know is, why did this car come to a complete and utter stop? Like, did the person fall asleep? Were they not well? Was there a bit more to it? Who knows? But as you say, the video's gone around, the headlines. It's damaging. Now, I was looking at why they're dropping. Why is Tesla dropping these prices? And they've put prices up in the past, and there were people seem to be buying electric cars at an incredible rate. If we went back to in the direction of mid last year, maybe in the March, June, somewhere in there last year, if you were wanting to order a Tesla in New Zealand and some other parts of the world, you could easily have a sort of a 9-month, type wait, right? Those were the dates, the time periods advertised. Now, if you go to the Tesla New Zealand website at the moment and you pick a Tesla Model 3, you will see if it's their sort of standard range vehicle, the availability date for the standard configs are all January 2023. Like, we've never seen that with Tesla before. So that says to me they've got a whole lot of stock just sitting there in New Zealand waiting for people to order it. Like, this is like, what? That's not how Tesla works. You order, they build the machine, and then the vehicle, the iPad on wheels, whatever you want to call it, but they build them, and then they ship them. They ship them out. So this is very unusual. And even with they've dropped the long range model, brought down the price of the performance a little bit, so it's not so far off probably what the long range was. But now you've just got the rear wheel drive, or what used to be the standard range plus, and the performance model. So a bit of a change there. Even with the performance model, basically it says estimated delivery Jan-March 2023. So which suggests that they've got some of those sort of just kicking around as well. So I find this really, really fascinating in terms of how much things have changed in a pretty short space of time, and I'm really curious what's the long range impact of Musk's involvement with Twitter and him just getting a bit more political, because very, very easy to basically alienate a very large percentage of your potential buyers. And if that has indeed happened and Musk has alienated half his potential buyers,
I imagine
the future of Tesla is going to be pretty grim if that's the case.
Well, totally. I mean, if he keeps down this route, there's a lot of Teslas not being sold in California now, I imagine, any kind of deep partisan state in the US where his name is really tied to certain political ideologies increasingly. I imagine he's really hurting his brand there. So yes, but I don't think it's a hot take to say Musk hasn't done himself any favors in the last couple of weeks.
All right, now onto other topics. The gaming industry in New Zealand. Now, we're in this situation where we've had a very strong gaming sector in New Zealand, and you could say that, look, Kiwis, when you look at how well New Zealand has done when it comes to the film sector and to gaming, that this is really a reflection of the creative talents of Kiwis. But of course, there's elements in here that tie back to how good we are at monetizing these things, how much government gets behind and helps a particular segment. And recent information out, the last I think it was probably end of last year, was highlighting how our gaming industry actually earns more. I think it's a third more than the gaming sector in Australia. So we're producing some really good creative content in the form of video games, and we've been in this leading position, but the tide is starting to turn, isn't it? We've now got challenges because Australia, you have a scenario where the government are offering huge incentives, along the lines of what we've seen in New Zealand to Hollywood, where we've said, hey, come to New Zealand and produce your TV series here, your movies here. We're going to give you big rebates for doing that. And that seemed to have worked out pretty well for New Zealand, I've got to say. But there are, depending on where you sit on the political, spectrum in terms of your viewing of that, obviously there's going to be a range of opinions, whether ideologically it's something that we shouldn't do. through to, we just must keep doing that to be competitive on the global stage. And now we're kind of in that same position when it comes to gaming, because we're seeing, game developers that are in New Zealand, basically, someone's saying, as you would if you had, if you were based in Australia, and trying to encourage people to move from New Zealand to Australia, and even the game developers themselves being enticed across to the Australian shores. So it's not a great position to be in. I guess the question is, how do you deal with this? Because there's no sort of perfect answer that's going to please everyone.
Well, no, I think one of the things that frustrates people in the gaming sector is that it was such an avoidable problem because we saw it coming from a long way away. And it's not like a new thing.
True.
We've been, the gaming sector's been, I was speaking about this years ago when I started at News Hub about one of my first TV stories was about how the gaming sector had sort of fallen through the cracks. And I think the contrast with the film sector is a really great example, because we gave Amazon, what was it, about $400 million in tax rebates to film one season of Lord of the Rings here. And then they left. And so they basically just took all that money with them. And I think the cost-benefit analysis by anyone's metric was pretty dire. A fraction of that money could have been transformative for the gaming sector here, because the costs for startup are a lot lower than a giant Hollywood production. I mean, look at Grinding Gear Games in Henderson. That was 2 guys, graduated, founded that studio. Yes, it did scale up quite a lot. They did get investment in, but the startup cost for it wasn't enormous, and they ended up selling to Tencent for 200 mil, I believe. And that's an incredible success story, but that's just one of many. You've got Rocketworks. You've got unbelievable work being done in New Zealand, and it's all sort of in spite of government, not because of government help, right? And I just think it's such a low-hanging fruit for investment, because it's a frictionless export. There's a limit to how many cows you can cram per hectare, but there's no upper ceiling on code that you can export, right? So all of the usual tyrannies that face the New Zealand economy don't apply to video gaming. There is just no limit to the amount of code we can export, minimal environmental cost. It's the largest entertainment industry on the planet, $350 billion. It's surging year on year. So I just feel like there are just so many wins in that column. And when you look at Australia, up to 30-40% R&D tax credit, meaning you'll get 40 cents back on the dollar if you found a gaming studio in Australia. I don't want to paint with a really broad brush here and just say it's entirely a good thing and we should completely follow that model, because depending on how you do it, you can just incentivize massive corporations to set up shop and just earn money back without really injecting too much money into the local economy and sort of crush smaller indie devs, because depending on how you write those R&D tax incentives, you can make it actually out of reach for just those small sort of plucky businesses and game studios that we might want to encourage. But overall, I don't think the thing that everyone agrees on is that we have to do something. I just think there's a bit of a lack of political will and clarity in New Zealand. I mean, as I mentioned, I've got a bit of a crossover between tech and politics, and so I spend a bit of time in Wellington. And it's not like anyone is anti-tech or anti-gaming. Every politician likes to say that they support tech gaming. Yeah. It's just the devil's in the details with these things. And I think responsibility for it's always been quite diffuse. So you've got, the economic development minister, you've got the digital economy minister, then you've got a minister for trade, and the portfolio's diffuse responsibility quite far. So the science and tech and innovation portfolio. And so it doesn't really squarely fall on anyone. Digital economy is usually the person that you go to. But I mean, last time we had David Clark on our show, he made a lot of noises about, yes, we're definitely working on a plan. Not a lot has come of it. I talked to Claire Curran when she was the minister. Gaming's fallen through the cracks, and still nothing's really come of it. So I think it's partly because, frankly, I mean, this sounds really blunt, you've just got a lot of 60-plus lawyers in Parliament. You don't have a lot of people from younger generations really connected to the tech space or the gaming space in particular. And so they may not have as much accessibility to it, may not as much understanding. We briefly flirted with getting a chief technology officer, Derek Hanley. That didn't go anywhere. So I feel like there isn't that voice, that lobbyist in Parliament making noise for these kind of things. But yeah, I think the sad thing is, since the gaming sector's done so well for so long, there's also not as much incentive from Parliament to do anything because they'll say, well, hang on, you guys have been growing double digits every year. You're fine.
Sort of 50% sort of increases year on year, right?
So why should we do anything?
You throw that lead away if not careful.
Yeah.
So, so really good points there.
Yeah.
And look, I think we probably need to delve in a future episode more to what needs to change, and it'd be great if there was a lot more transparency in government around what are their goals, what are they working to, like if everyone could see, okay, well on all these different and I know it works in business, doesn't necessarily work in government, but these different metrics. Okay, yep, we've got these different areas. Here's the goal of what we want to achieve. Here's what as the government's going to do to try and help those things happen. If we had that sort of level, but of course it's not that way, and it's not that simple, and things are constantly changing. But we'll probably dedicate an episode to delving a little bit more into that. Of course, we're in an election year, so it doesn't hurt sometimes to prod a little bit and to put some ideas out there. Whether it's for the current government or whether it's for an opposition and other parties, and to maybe see what gets picked up. So
yeah, absolutely, and I think. Unfortunately, this was a really big part of Judith Collins' platform when she was national leader, then obviously when she was ousted and Luxon took over. I think there will be an unfortunate element of the politics of it all. Let's say National did get in, might not be as much of a focus for them because it was such a plank of Judith Collins' portfolio. I can imagine Luxon being like, well, let's not just rehash Judith Collins' ideas. Let's focus on my ones, which are much more sort of bread and butter. Let's look at the backbone of the economy sort of ideas. And I don't know. We haven't seen it. I can't judge. I don't know what their platform's going to be. But my suspicion might be that some of those ideas might be shunted to the backbench of a new national government. But hey, we'll wait and see. We don't know when the election is. We've only got months away though.
Yeah, and look, I mean, I think what we've seen from as we usually do, as the politicians sort of talk a good game, but how does it actually play out if we're keeping with gaming terms?
Yeah, exactly. When there's the actual score on the board. And
it does vary. So yeah, definitely something we'll have to come back to. Now, another technology that has been pretty interesting lately, I guess the broad category, artificial intelligence, and we've been talking about Chat GPT and being able to ask questions of OpenAI's tools and really throw all sorts of things at that. There's been DALL-E in terms of generative AI when it comes to creating images, and now Microsoft have unveiled VALL-E. Now I didn't actually prep Joe Allen on this, so I've probably we probably can't necessarily sort of play a sample of it unless I put the mic.
Anyone look it up. Just look up VALL-E.
Close to my laptop.
You can get a sample of it if you just go. You'll have it in 2 seconds if you look it up.
VALL-E. And I find this quite fascinating. So what they've created is a scenario where you can take a very small voice print from an individual, like 3 seconds. Like this is a tiny amount, and then you fire at what you want the AI to say, and it sounds like really realistic.
Yeah, you were going through some samples before, and since I couldn't see your screen, I couldn't. A couple I could tell, but 80-90% of the time I couldn't tell which one you were playing. And yeah, it's similar to a lot of the other sort of synthetic media technologies coming online. It was only a matter of time before we reached voice. We'd had text, we'd had images. This just was sort of the natural progression. What fascinates me with that is how short the prompt you need to give it is. And there's a musical version as well where you feed it 3 seconds of music and it'll finish the song for you. The other thing that gets me with the voice element is that they can match inflection and emotion. So you can say, make it a little bit angrier, make it a little bit sadder, and it can understand those kind of emotive, naturalistic speaking prompts. And it's not hard to see how all these technologies are going to intersect, right? So that's the big thing for me. I think when we look back on these couple of years, I genuinely think synthetic media is going to be the thing that stands out as the tech innovation of these years. That was 2022 was the year that artificial intelligence synthetic media really started taking off, when the robots actually started to speak. And there's always going to be kind of overwhelming and silly headlines talking about, the robot's going to displace everyone, rada. I think it's more that these tools are going to be able to do, and kind of can now, B- work in essentially any job. In the creative field. They don't do A+ work now, but they can do B-, C+. And a lot of people and a lot of money gets involved in producing B- work, right? And when it can generate it at 5 seconds at a pop and an essentially unlimited amount of content just based on small prompts at no cost, that is going to be disruptive. And once we start seeing them intersect, like once you have DALL-E, GPT-3 and VALL-E and associated technologies combined in one package, which is going to be inevitable, I think we're really not far away from a world where you'll log on to a website, it'll scrape your publicly available social data, and it will just generate you a suite of content. Like it'll be like, here, I know based on everything that you've clicked on in your lifetime online, here's all the things you're interested in, here's 10 articles. They might not all be great, but they'll be interesting, they'll be serviceable. And as time goes, and all of these systems are so good at being trained to someone's specific interests, they're going to get better and better and better. And I think over the next 5 years, we're going to move from a world of kind of hyper-curated content, algorithmic feeds, curating content based on business interests of social media platforms and tech giants, to hyper-bespoke media, right? You're going to have content that was made literally just for you. It wasn't found and curated for you. Here's 10 articles that were written just for you, populated with art that it thinks that you like, and then we'll garnish it with some moving footage and maybe a song. Write you a song based on all of your interests. Music's actually one of the easiest things for AI to tackle. We think of it such a intrinsically human pursuit, but it's on it's on a tonal scale. There's a lot of math to it. It's actually relatively easy for AI to generate a song. Once that matches to your biometric data, imagine just your watch going and then your personal assistant powered by ChatGPT-3 speaking to you, being like, hey, Paul, you seem a bit down today. I wrote you a song. And it's psychologically, chemically, linguistic, just perfectly suited to you. Here, I wrote you a poem. I wrote you some articles that I think you'll like. Hyper bespoke media just aimed directly at you. I think that's going to be amazing, but somewhat terrifying.
Yeah, look, I think there's definitely always two sides to these things, aren't there? And we've already had Google Assistant being able to do the make a booking for you, right? We're like, hey, Google's make a booking for me at XYZ restaurant, and it can pick up the phone and make the call and do the booking and so on and be smart enough to do that. Yeah, there are just an insane number of sort of possibilities for how this stuff gets used in the years ahead, and how we get our head around it, and what legislation is needed. And
it's much faster than our ability. I mean, as always, right? It's the old story with tech, that tech always outpaces regulation. But I think this is exponential curve now, right? If the next 5 years are going to be a lot faster developing than the previous 5, and I mean that's been true for the last sort of 15. But it does seem AI particularly is on this explosive growth curve. I know there's a quote that always stuck in my head. The sociobiologist E.O. Wilson, he had this lovely line where he was like, "The problem with everything is that we have Paleolithic brains, medieval institutions, and godlike technology." And I was like, that's so true. Always like almost everything comes back to that. Like we've got lizard brains that aren't really good at dealing with complicated problems, really creaky old institutions that move really slowly to regulate anything, and just this unbelievably powerful tech that we keep improving on an exponential growth curve.
Yeah.
Our brains aren't getting any better. Our institutions aren't getting any faster.
No.
But the tech keeps getting faster.
Yeah.
And then that feeds back into this kind of terrifying loop.
Yeah, and when I'm talking from a futurist perspective, that's kind of always that aspect of look, my brain hasn't got any, better over the last 30 years, but tech has, and this is why we need to be leveraging and using, technology to do good stuff for us. Of course, there's usually multiple perspectives, and these things don't always end up, everything's not always on the positive side. So we've got to look for how we get those positive outcomes. Now, moving on, because this is another sort of rabbit hole area. We talked about Tesla, their share prices drop. We're sort of seeing this, right across a large number of companies where during COVID, we saw some pretty big rises in stock values and stock prices. And it's kind of, it's come back in some cases a lot, in some cases a little, but quite broadly we kind of look around and big brands, whether it's the AWSs or Microsofts and so on, have gone up to some pretty big figures and then have, really come back a bit. It does vary quite a bit. What are your sort of, thoughts and observations on this? Because you raised this with, earlier as it's quite a fascinating, fascinating area, and like, I guess we need to lean into sort of NZ Everyday Investor, our financial or investment show, to kind of delve into some broader patterns and what the future holds. But what have you picked up from this? Where are you in your thought processes on it?
I mean, there's so much there. Obviously, there's the macro story that the global economy isn't doing great, obviously. So there's a certain amount that you can strip away just off that. If we're heading into a global recession, no one's going to do great. But obviously, when you dig into the numbers, when you're looking at 60% drops for some tech companies, Meta's down 60%, for example. I think Tesla was around the same for a while. I think the companies that have done the worst were the worst now, are the ones that were doing the best in the peak of the COVID pandemic, the stay-at-home economy sort of companies, the Netflixes, for example. So this titanic surge during COVID. So there is the hangover effect of they were artificially inflated to heights that they realistically never should have been at. But the thing that underpins it is the raise in interest rates as well. As inflation started going wild because of stimulus money and various other factors, interest rates started rising for the first time in a long time. And a lot of these companies have never been particularly profitable. I mean, Twitter and Netflix are the great examples, right? Because in a low interest rate environment, you get to sell dreams. As long as you add subscribers, you monetize later. And that's what they've been doing for a long time. And Silicon Valley is an expert in this. Sell dreams, sell dreams, sell dreams. Look how many users we've got. Look how many users you've got. Yeah, but where's the money? That comes later. That comes later. The moment the interest rate starts coming up, it's like, oh, crap, the music's starting to stop. I'm going to have to start showing receipts for this. Yeah. So I think the interest rate sort of underpins a lot of that. There's this idea that a guy called Derek Thompson had over the Atlantic of the millennial lifestyle subsidy, that there's a whole generation of people who have had their lifestyles subsidized by companies, mainly in tech, like Uber, like Netflix, like DoorDash and food delivery, that have never really made huge amounts of money, but because of the low interest rate environment, have just been losing money and providing these great services and are now having to keep upping their prices. So all these millennials are like, suddenly all my bills are going up. And it's like, because your lifestyle's been subsidized by low interest rates for years. And I think the other big story there is, particularly when you look at things like Meta, the Silicon Valley model's basically been based on the surveillance capitalism model, which sounds really grand, but it's just, as anyone listening to this has probably heard of that term, harvesting data more and more invasively to target ads more and more effectively. When the iPhone came out, Silicon Valley jumped on that, particularly all of the social media giants, just printed money off of that. It was like they realized that we'd all been letting off like a precious resource and it had been floating in the atmosphere, and they learned to mine it, but instead of oil, it was like personal data. And then now they've mined it all. They've gathered all the low-hanging fruit they can from that advertising model. And they need to figure out the next thing, because governments are becoming increasingly suspicious of the surveillance capitalism model. You're seeing regulators start to step in. Just teens, younger generations are moving away from social media models. They're starting to realize that it's a bit toxic for them. Players like TikTok have entered the market and are hoovering up a lot of that market share. So I think that's why Zuckerberg's just setting billions of dollars on fire in a field trying to make the metaverse a thing, because he knows that they're running on empty now. They're running on steam for that old model that kind of birthed this huge boom in tech, particularly in that social media space. They need to invent the next big thing. They need a new iPhone, basically, and none of them have got one yet. I think a lot of people are betting it's going to be AI. It seems to be that's where the money's flowing and that's where the excitement is. Whoever, and it seems like OpenAI, Sam Altman, there's rumors, not confirmed, this is conjecture, but I think Microsoft was looking at $10 billion investment into OpenAI. I think if I was going to put my money anywhere on what the next iPhone level advancement is, it'll be the person that nails that perfect combination of synthetic media AI tools to give everyone their own personal AI Jarvis sort of figure from Iron Man, which has been my fantasy for years, so I'm personally excited about. But yes, of course, there's going to be some terrifying consequences that come, I imagine.
Yeah, and look, I guess we look to our biggest players, the Googles or Alphabets, Microsoft, Apple, AWS, these sorts of firms. They've got an incredible capability. They've got massive breadth and depth. And so how this whole area kind of, plays out over the next few years, I think is going to be quite fascinating. And even this is the sort of thing you can start to see, well, how it plays out over the next few weeks, is actually pretty interesting in the next few months. So yeah, I think it, picked it right as far as the role of artificial intelligence. It's it's a really, really big deal right now. And we've certainly talked about GPT a little bit on the New Zealand Tech podcast, but anyone listening that hasn't gone and actually logged in and tried out some of these tools, then you absolutely must.
It's so much fun. Like, if nothing else, it's so much fun. And that sounds so trite, but I think that does actually say something about new tech, right? Like, there's some new tech that's kind of impressive, but you don't keep using. You're like, oh, that was nice. I tried that headset. I looked at a 3D TV. It was boring. It's not fun to use. ChatGPT 3 just keeps getting more fun the more you use it. And the more being in dialogue with a machine is an experience that I've never had before. Like, actually speaking to a machine and feeling like it's speaking back to me. And it made me realize that it's actually a better way of accessing information than Google is, which I imagine is why, again, you hear rumors that Google is kind of pivoting a lot in some of its back-of-house R&D off the back of ChatGPT 3. Yeah. Because Google, when I try and find information, it's got the world's information at their fingertips, but it's all on me to kind of sift through it. I have to find the right search term. I say, what was the point of the War of the Roses? Can someone explain it to me? Okay, here's 10 ads first, and then here's 50 articles. Sift through it yourself. Yeah. But with ChatGPT 3, you've got access to the world's information, but it's like you've got your personal librarian or assistant. You say, hey, ChatGPT, could you, in 200 words in real simple language, just explain what the point of the War of the Roses was? Oh, Finn, absolutely. Here you go. Here's perfect 200 words on that. Super simple. Oh, okay, that was actually a bit too complicated. And then you can literally just speak to it. Could you make that a little easier to understand? Talk to me like I'm an 8-year-old. Absolutely. And even one of the basic prompts that they prompt you with when you first start using it is explain quantum mechanics to a child. And I don't know if anyone's ever tried to explain quantum mechanics to a child, but it's really hard. Not saying that I could do it, but it does an incredible job. Even the most unbelievably complicated concepts, digesting them and translating them. Or what should I wear? Like, I'm a male of a certain age. Here's my dimensions. Can you just give me some wardrobe suggestions? Absolutely. Here you go. Whereas with Google, you'd have to just navigate a thicket of ads, and you don't know what to look at, and it takes away the friction out of using the internet. And I always I can't remember who it was, but some investor had a great line where he was like, if you're trying to articulate how to make an innovative product that people want to invest in, just think 2 words. What sucks? And he was like, if you can think of something that sucks and you solve for the thing that sucks, you are going to get a huge amount of money. And I feel like they've realized what sucks about using the internet, which is it's this overflow of information. There's too much to navigate. There's too much responsibility. It's choice paralysis. Whereas ChatGPT 3 is like, I'm your little concierge. Like, here, I'm going to take all the hassle out of the internet. What do you need? I'll provide it for you.
Yeah. It does have that challenge, currently that we have with online in general, of the results that we see not necessarily actually being, true or real,
yes,
and the biases and so on that you get based on, what's popular out there online and all sorts of other factors that you can ask it a question, it comes back to you with an answer that's just not. It's not it's not true, or it's sort of partly true, or so these are all things that we will see evolve as things move forward. So I'm really fascinated to see how some of those things get solved, to see how does the education sort of system deal with it? How do we deal with, like, overnight, we could easily just have a complete breakdown of how Google works, for instance, because Google is all around content and so on, right? So it's indexing and giving you based on the content that it finds. Well, if tomorrow, your employer, Warner Brother Discovery, decided somewhere in the world, like, hey, we want to dominate Google search for, I don't know, 100 areas, and because they're a big global player who rank highly naturally in Google because of their scale and so on, so their sites have a lot. It's like, okay, well, let's use AI to work out what are those top areas to dominate. We'll do that today, and we'll have a review and we'll look over it. And then tomorrow, what we'll do is we'll get these tools to actually generate a whole lot of content on those things.
Yes.
That's online, tomorrow, and let's use the AI to work out how we need to add some SEO elements to really make sure.
Yes, exactly.
And a week later, you're starting, to rise up the rankings and so on. You obviously, the news organization, you land in news searches. This is the sort of thing that could change very quickly. And of course, when we add in these tools that can generate, voice, all right, well, let's create 1,000 podcasts,
Exactly.
1,000 new podcasts. Let's do it. And we're going to use Finn's voice, and we're going to use, we'll have Mike McRoberts, and et cetera, hosting these bits of content in a virtual sense. I mean, these sort of things could happen very, very quickly, right? It's all there right now.
And I think that, and you don't want to be alarmist about it, but when you look at the scale of content that can be produced and the speed and the frequency, just like you say, I think we're very, very close to a world where you can produce essentially infinite content at scale of increasing accuracy and precision modeled around whatever you want. You can say, write me 1,000 articles in the voice of Ezra Klein from Vox, for example. And I don't want to overstate the case. Right now, ChatGPT-3 cannot do that. Once you get quite familiar with it, you do sort of start seeing the cracks and you see what it can't do well. Yeah. But ChatGPT-4 is coming online in 6 months. I mean, it's about 10x in every dimension, sort of larger as a model. And I listened to the Hard Fork podcast from the New York Times, which is a great tech podcast. And they said not many of us have had access to it, but everyone who has said the same thing. It's like looking at the face of God, which is obviously a hyperbolic statement to make. But when you consider how far this conversation has moved just in the last 6 months, right? Or even a year, like if you spoke to me 12 months ago and we looked at the best possible AI-generated content, it was maybe 2 orders of magnitude less impressive than this is. And if this goes 2 orders of magnitude more impressive in the next 12 months from where we are today, we are going to be in that world where infinite content creation is available essentially to anyone. And the problem of the internet's always been there's too much content, there's too much information, we can't dissect between it. What happens when you can make content based on anyone, any organization, and it's indistinguishable from the real thing? The worry is the issue we've had with the internet's just going to be dialed up to 11. And attack always outpaces defense in this area. So we don't have the tools to determine what is AI generated. To my knowledge, they are working on it now, but particularly on the image front, I know we don't want to go down a deep fake rabbit hole, but once you get pixel perfect video content that's synthetically generated, I don't know of, and the people I've spoken to don't really know of a way that you could tell if it was artificially generated or not, because you're dealing with the same fundamental information of the video. So yeah, it's a scary, wonderful, fantastic new world we're entering, and I'm sure there's going to be plenty more to speak about.
Yeah. Okay, a few other things we want to chat about before we finish up. So one headline that caught my attention was the FAA in the US. What are they? Federal Aviation Authority.
Yeah.
Basically grounding like an insane number of flights because their tech went down basically, and so you know I remember maybe this was as it was happening, looking at a map of the US, sort of comparing how many flights were in the air compared to what normally would be at that particular time of day in the morning, and we're going back to last week, and apparently a damaged database file caused this widespread outage, mega millions of dollars of impact. You can't measure what the impact would have been on people's lives where they missed a flight or the flight didn't fly and it was their last chance to see a loved one before they pass away, and all these sorts of scenarios. It just sort of brought me back a little bit to earth. We got so used to things all running really well and really consistently. Our lives rely on technology just being, super robust and working. We'll turn up in a new city. We've got nothing but our phone, right? Our phone's going to get us transport. It's going to guide us how to walk part of the journey. It's got the list of who we're meeting with or who we're going to see, or if that family scenario of what's the hospital, what's all the dots. As soon as these things stop now, it's like this flick a switch back to the dark ages. And of course, none of us are probably that geared up for how to live in a non-tech world. And so look, I find it fascinating, and I may have mentioned previously around. Caught up with someone while in my travels recently, who's working. He's basically switched off the internet out of his personal life, which I just causes my mind to
I'm so impressed, but not for me personally.
Just to what, and just trying to put those dots together. What does that do for you and so on. But what a full-on thing to happen, but this could happen, any time on any sort of scale, right? Because
absolutely. I mean, it does say something about the sagging infrastructure of the US, not in the way that most people often think of the bridges collapsing, but the digital infrastructure and so many of these systems needs updating. If you ever want to be terrified, look up some of the software systems which run some of the nuclear silos, and they're on floppy disks like this big. And there is a security concern around that because they're harder to hack, but some of them are just like
floppy disks.
8-inch it's wild, some of the creaky infrastructure which runs incredibly important systems, both in the US and just, globally. But I also think it's part of the broader story that the pandemic sort of highlighted, right, of how as globalization has ramped up, we've just got these gossamer thin strands of production lines and supply chains and travel and commerce that have all interconnected us so tightly and efficiently, allowing us to just have quick, efficient access to goods, services, products, and everything. That's what modern life is built off. But as soon as you shake the system slightly, like the longer you stretch these things, the cheaper things get, but the more fragile they get, right? And I think that sort of shutdown of aviation space in the US is like one small sample, or well, kind of an aftershock of what we've all sort of experienced over the last 2 years of, this system that we've built is so fragile, and we gave it this massive punch, and we're slowly kind of rebuilding it, but we still don't know if we can put it together properly. And then, of course, that combines with the move back towards sort of protectionism that we're seeing from large economies. So yeah, there's a if anyone wants to be really scared, there's an amazing book called by Peter Zion called "The End of the World is Just the Beginning," and his argument is that 2019 was the best year any of us will ever see in our lives because we peaked in terms of global trade and globalization, and it's all downhill from here. Which is a dark note to leave listeners on, but just in case we didn't scare you enough today, I'd really recommend giving that one a read.
Now, also on the aviation and the aerospace front, a couple of items. One that caught my attention was a USB battery pack halting a flight from Taiwan to Singapore. So a little USB power bank. I don't know how big or small it was, but went up in flames on this flight from Taiwan. I think probably before they took off, if I remember correctly. And so I guess we've heard around, and some of us will have had it cause us an issue, trying to check in batteries and so on, and check in luggage, and the rules there sometimes frustrating. We've heard about little trackers even being banned by some airlines and the like. But this is the flip side, right? Is these things can actually combust.
Oh, 100%.
And so, look, there does need to be a balance. And, I think sometimes we just need to hear these stories to sort of, balance up the frustrations when we find out that we left something in our luggage and it's gone and it didn't make it to the destination.
We're going to see a lot more of that. Only thing, sorry, I know, but the only thing on the battery front is that we're electrifying everything currently as we move off fossil fuels, right? So we're about to have so many more batteries in every aspect of our lives. And when they go up, particularly electric car batteries, doesn't happen often, but when it does, there's a lot of toxic chemicals in there. So yeah, I think battery fires are going to become an increasing part of our conversation as we electrify literally every aspect of our lives.
Yeah. Now, the other thing, this is probably not particularly new, but there is an entity in China, CAS Space, spin-off of the Chinese Academy of Sciences, CAS, that is, has been developing rockets for, commercial satellite launches and so on. And I came across this story sort of highlighting and showing some of these rockets. And I was looking at them, I'm thinking, they look really familiar. Hold on, is this sort of basically, taken SpaceX's designs, a little bit of Blue Origin there, but it looked like, they've just stolen everything that's been, designed elsewhere.
I mean, good artists imitate great ones steal, right?
And it's just, but there's some of that, they were just so blatant. That it was, just kind of blew my mind a little bit with how blatant that was. So fascinating. But this is what we expect. As if somebody comes up with something good, everyone else is looking, and we've certainly got this incredible situation going on, shall we say, particularly between the US and China trying to outmaneuver each other.
Yes.
It certainly seems as though if there's got an IP invented somewhere that's going to be really important in the future, that there's at least one one country where a lot of money will be thrown at making sure that's emulated and competed with. It's absolutely fascinating sort of watching some of these things from a distance. Seems like the latest bits and pieces are suggesting that the moves that the US have made to kind of keep in front from a microchip perspective are going reasonably well. But who knows if China decides to invade Taiwan,
that's it, right?
How does that play out? Because that's where most US chips are produced
today, I think
right?
the TSMC, the Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company, produces like 90% of the world's hyper advanced semiconductors, right? And that's in everything. Like if anyone really wants to go down that rabbit hole, look up how much of your life depends on semiconductors, and it's literally everything. If you want to know why you couldn't get a PS5 for so long, it was semiconductors. If you want to know why you couldn't get those cars for such a long time, it was semiconductors. And I think there's about a 6-month slack in the global supply chain of those semiconductors. And if that one factory in Taiwan goes down, things come to a screeching halt in so many industries, including defense. So I think I think the semiconductor discussion is such a good example of how tech actually underpins so many news stories and global discussions we're having, even at that geopolitical level. Like, oh, the US doesn't care about the territorial integrity of China. They care about the semiconductors. Like, no matter what they posture with, that's what's underpinning everything. They don't want China to get that factory. I think you could make an argument that there's never been an industrial building that has more sway over global politics than that one does by square footage, the most geopolitically important building on Earth. That's why they've put all that money into chips now. But it takes 10 years to build this kind of capacity.
Yeah.
And there are very few people that know how to make these things. And they're all in Taiwan. And that's why Taiwan has them, because they've made themselves indispensable. And that's why the US is giving them such firm backing increasingly over time, because everybody needs the semiconductors out of Taiwan. No one knows how to make them. And they've got at least 10 years before anyone else learns to. So,
and that's been part of the benefit that the US have had, as when they've put in rules saying, hey, Americans that are in China that are doing this, hey, you've got to stop that right now. You're going to lose your citizenship and so on. The pressure that they've put in is huge. So yeah, I'm really curious to see how it plays out. One of the charts I looked at was putting TSMC around sort of half of the market, from one particular standpoint. Sort of it does depend on how you look at things, but certainly there's a lot going on in that space, but 100%. It moves very, very slowly, as you say, because it takes so long to sort of build a foundry and to set up manufacture of new chips takes time. And we've all seen the pain and discomfort of that. During COVID, when things were shut down and different chips and so on were stopped from a manufacturing standpoint, and the flow on that's had. Well, there's a lot we've covered. There's probably a lot more we could cover if we had another hour or two. But really been good to catch up, Finn. Thank you.
An absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me. And like I say, it's really nice having these kind of chats outside of the very truncated news format. You know what it's like. I'll call you, being like, I've got a story for 6. You get in front of a camera in the next 30 minutes, and only 30 seconds of our conversation will make it to air. Where it's really nice to actually be able to sort of dwell on some points and flesh them out.
Yeah, no, it's been really good. So folks that are sort of wanting to follow a little bit more of what you're doing, what's the main place to go and have a
newshub.co.nz. If you just search me there, everything I do tends to end up there. I'll be on the AM show relatively frequently. I'll just watch News Hub at 6 p.m, watch AM show, watch Project. I'm just going to shill for TV3 as a whole right now. I do follow my Twitter. I don't tweet very often, but FM_Hogan on Twitter. I do lurk there, but usually I'm a silent observer, but occasionally you'll see me post there too.
Yep. Oh, good stuff. Well, thanks everyone for listening in. And of course, thank you to our show partners, Vodafone, 2 Degrees, Spark, HP, and Gorilla Technology for supporting the show. And of course, we will be back again with another show next week. If you've been watching the live stream, then fire up a podcast player and subscribe to the show. Be that Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts. Find one of those if you're new to the audio side. Of course, most of our listeners are on the audio side. So if you're listening that way, but you want to catch the show earlier, then certainly follow me or connect with me on LinkedIn. But you can also find NZ Tech Podcast and myself across Twitter and Facebook. And also we have NZ Tech Podcast on YouTube. So those are the places for the video. All right. Thanks, everyone. Catch you next week. Thanks again, Finn.
Cheers, mate.
Cheers.
The New Zealand Tech Podcast, brought to you by Gorilla Technology, proactive and strategic IT.